Sorry, it really has been a while since I've been like in front of the camera. I feel like I'm like warming up to it again. Hi, my name is Dami. I'm a writer, and today I'm going to be talking about how November writing month, whatever you want to call it, has been going for me. A one-word summary would probably be chaotic. My last video, I think I titled I've Already Failed NaNoWriMo, or November Writing Month, and I think it was like November 3rd or something like that. And the gist of that video was realizing that I need to go back to the drawing board a little bit with my work in progress. I want to talk about what to do when writing gets hard, and not necessarily what you should do when writing gets hard, but what I did when writing gets hard. Because this month writing was very hard. Not from like an emotional perspective per se, but from I don't even want to call it writer's block, because I had lots of ideas and I kind of knew where I needed to go, but it felt very much just like 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And I thought about shelving this. I thought about just like shelving this project entirely, and I was very close to doing so. But let's start from the beginning before we get ahead of ourselves. So I started November Writing Month with the intention of finishing up my adult steampunk fantasy. Right when I started it, it was at 64K words and kind of complete. It was more so between a draft 0 and a draft 1. I knew I needed to really get it to 80K words, and it would be pretty rounded out if I did so. And so the plan was to have a more polished draft that's hitting closer to the 80, 90K word count. A little bit about the story. It's an adult steampunk fantasy. I think I already said that. That includes the conflict of these violent delights, the setting of Arcane, and the themes of the Incredible Hulk. It is a story that revolves around 2 siblings and the responsibilities that they assume. And it touches on themes of responsibility, expectations, revenge, tokenism. Yeah, that's what it's about. Those are the vibes. And this story has been kicking my butt. A little bit of recap. If you watched my last video, you already know some of this stuff, but a little bit of recap. I wrote this story about 1.5 years ago. I wrote it in about 2 months maybe. It might have been faster than that. It was kind of written almost as a challenge to the querying process. At that time I was querying children with gifts. I think it'd been maybe about like a year since or not a year, I think it'd been like 6, maybe 9 months since I've been querying children with gifts. Didn't have an agent yet. Was working on something new. This is one of the stories that I was working on. It was a story that I almost just wrote for me. I didn't like in the back of my head I kind of have this expectation that yes, I would like to pursue like publishing with this book, but that was very much way in the back of my head, like in a closet somewhere. This was just like a writing for fun sort of project. There was some thinking that went behind it, but I just word vomited what I wanted to say and like left it alone. Now I'm coming back to it, and it is kicking my butt for a couple of reasons. So one of the first, like I think I already said this, but one of the first problems that I had with the story was the word count. So I knew I was going to be adding on words if I wanted to really finish the story. So I knew the word count was a problem. I needed to add words. The age range was also initially a problem. I actually wrote this book and it was young adult, and I aged everyone appropriately. So everyone was like 16, 17, 18 years old. And I gave it to a friend of mine to read. And to this day, until the day I die, I will frankly be embarrassed that I gave this book to my friend to read, because it's such a draft 0, draft 1. This is not ready. It was not ready for anyone to read it. My friend is so nice. She read my story and she was like, my comrade in Christ, you need to age these characters up. And from her perspective, it actually had nothing to do with the violence. It was more like the themes of the story. She was like, it doesn't quite make sense that 18-year-olds are doing this stuff. They should be adults. And she was totally right. I think part of the reason I'd written it as a young adult is because I didn't like trust myself or believe in myself to write to write in the adult space, like as a fiction writer. There's a lot of imposter syndrome kind of playing a role there. And I think, frankly, like a lot of internalized misogyny too, because when I think about adult fantasy, I'm thinking about Sanderson, I think about Lord of the Rings, I think about Dune, I think about Patrick Rothfuss. I actually have not read any of his books, but that's what I think about. George R.R. Martin. And when I think young adult fantasy, I'm thinking Shadow and Bone, Six of Crows, Children with Gifts, Ember in the Ashes, as you probably recognize. When I thought about adult fantasy, I was thinking about a lot of male writers. And when I was thinking about a young adult fantasy, I was thinking about a lot of women, like female writers. That is stupid, because there are a lot of great books in the adult fantasy space that are written by women. The Poppy Wars, Ursula Oh no. Is it Ursula Le Guin? Oh no. Oh gosh, I'm so embarrassed. It's like when you read a word and you never say it out loud, and then you have to say it out loud one day and you're just like, oh god, this is like when I said bun instead of bun. Anyway, is it Ursula Le Guin? I feel so ashamed. But like The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang, anything by Ursula Le Guin, right? N.K. Jemisin writes an adult fantasy and young adult fantasy as well. These are all women. Why is that not coming to my mind when I'm immediately thinking about adult fantasy? So something that I need to challenge is just in general, right? Like just challenging myself, but it's part of the reason, but it's why I just didn't really see myself writing in the adult fantasy space, because I was like, well, I'm not poetic like Tolkien, and the universe I create isn't as expansive as Sanderson's. And it doesn't have to be. I think they're doing their own thing. I shouldn't be trying to copy them or even emulate them. That's not the only way fantasy needs to look. I think basically there's conversation to be had about why and I think in publishing too, generally speaking, women do tend to be pigeonholed a little bit into the young adult space regardless. And so I never really saw myself as an adult fantasy writer for a long time, because I was like, well, you're not as good as Sanderson and Tolkien. And like, no. And that's not to say, frankly, I'm as good as R.F. Kuang either. There was just a lot of intimidation there. My friend is like, don't be dumb. They need to be adults. And she was totally right. And so I aged them up and they're adults. This was also a while ago. This was like a year ago. So I have become a little bit more comfortable with the idea that it's adult fantasy and that I can write in the adult fantasy space. If you see my bio and things like that, I am a young adult and adult fantasy writer. That was something that has been like workshop behind the scenes with this story. Characterization, I talked a little bit about in my last video. When I was going back to revise this manuscript, I realized that I did not have a good understanding of my characters. It felt like I just created like stick figures. People could just like project their own assumptions about those characters. They weren't real, which is odd for me because I'm very character driven in general. I know my characters before I even know my story. I know my story or my plot. I know who my characters are. I know what they want. I know what they are trying to do. I know what matters to them, what relationships matter to them, what they like personally struggle with. I know all that stuff before I sometimes even have like a concept. And then the characters fit into that concept. I kind of had an idea of what I had a better idea of was the relationship between the siblings and what the relationship looked like, but I didn't have a great idea of who these siblings actually are as individuals and the people around them. Side plots, there were negative side plots, frankly, because I hadn't created real characters. I hadn't created real people. And so they didn't have, their own goals and motivations. Everyone was essentially just a means to an end, and that I did not like that. I do not think that makes for a great book or a great reading experience. And I also changed the tenses. There are some flashback scenes in the story. It's kind of told in like a dual timeline with I'd say 20% of the book is in the past and the remaining 80 is in the present. Flashback scenes are a significant amount of the book, so I didn't want to like italicize the flashback scenes. They're not scenes, they truly are chapters. And so the idea I came up with was flashback scenes, past tense. Present tense is the main linear story. And I got that idea listening to one of like Chris's videos, and she realized at some point that she needed to change the tense of one of the stories she was writing. And I was like, that's genius. I don't know why that never occurred to me. But that was like the biggest breakthrough with the story, was realizing I can just change the tenses and that would make things a lot easier. So basically, I knew all of this stuff needed to be fixed either going into November or within the first like 4 to 5 days of November. So I knew pretty early on that I was not completing any sort of traditional NaNoWriMo challenge. But that's okay. I can focus on my writing, and that's no big deal. So I went back to the drawing board. I really considered my characters. I fleshed them out, just really brainstorm and rethink some things. Like I said earlier, this process has felt very 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I start off November 1st with, I'm going to add 80K, or I'm going to get this manuscript to 80K words. I'm moving forward, and then I realize I don't know these characters and I don't know all this other stuff. I'm going back to the drawing board. And then I'm like, okay, I figured this stuff out. Now I'm going to go ahead and start. And so I just go into chapter 1 and I'm start changing the tenses and reading things and seeing how it's flowing. And I don't like how it's flowing because I now understand my characters really well. It's actually really frustrating to read the manuscript because the scenes that will develop the characters aren't there, or the scenes that are in there aren't developing the characters in the way that I want them to move. Then I'm realizing I need to just start over. I can plug and chug scenes if they work, but like that should be more of like a general reference instead of me revising that. Like I need to start over with a draft 0 or a draft 1, like a true draft 1. That was a realization that I made, I think, halfway through November. But I'm now starting this story from chapter 1, right? Because I'm rewriting it. I hate chapter 1s. I hate starting books, and ending them kind of depends. But starting, like, I hate starting chapters. I hate starting books as a writer. I hate writing that stuff. I get very in my head there. So I know what I want as like the setup and the opening to look like, but like what scene specifically do I start with? CK had some excellent advice. When you're thinking about starting a story, come late, leave early. Wherever you start your book or your chapter or your scene, it's the place that you generally will need to start is probably later than you think or later than you anticipate. And the same thing for like ending the chapters. Generally speaking, you can end the chapter a lot earlier than you might initially think. Now, this advice is not going to work for a lot of people. I imagine it probably doesn't work really well for like well-seasoned writers who know their system and know like how they do things. But for someone like me who's like, where do I start? Super helpful tip. When we start this chapter or start the book, or at least for me, what I'm really struggling with is info dumping. Because I do write a lot of fantasy, and so I know I need to explain stuff up front. Frankly, there is a degree of info dumping that I think just has to happen in fantasy. There are ways to make it digestible, and for it to not feel like an encyclopedia. There's definitely an art to it, but sometimes you have to info dump. And that's where I struggle with starting, because if it's fantasy, throwing you in a brand new world and I'm expecting you to like pick up on, what I need you to pick up on real fast. There's a tendency to potentially info dump, even if you're trying not to. So you might start the story with them like walking into like the meeting place, because you're going to use it like as an opportunity to have the character like interact with their surroundings or what have you, and that might be a great place to start. But for me personally, what I do realize is I don't necessarily need to start there. I can start from him. Maybe he's already in the bar. So that was really helpful for me, because that also means even wherever I start, I'm likely going to chop off words at the beginning. So just start somewhere, Dami. Just start somewhere. But starting a story is hard, and I had a lot of false starts. I think I have like 3 or 4 versions of chapter 1. I get into chapter 1, it's a full start every now and then. I start a new chapter 1 and I finally get my groove. I'm working through it. I'm like, yes. The inciting incident, I remember struggling. I basically wrote like 2 versions of the inciting incident. It's the same thing. It boils down to the same like thing that, propels the story forward. But like how the characters get that information is different. I have different versions of that. But I start writing and then I get stuck again. And I get stuck because I'm like, what if this is plagiarism? And I'm like, listen, I am deathly afraid of plagiarizing someone's work. Unnecessarily afraid. As recently as like 6 months ago, I used to not read while I was like actively drafting. Revising is a different story. If I'm on revisions, I don't mind reading. I used to just like not read books like when I was drafting a story, because I was terrified that I would see something in like the book I'm reading and like incorporate it, and like just from like a subconscious level. And so I'm terrified that even if I don't want to, I'm going to like plagiarize something intentionally and get canceled. And very recently, I have found that reading in the genre that I'm writing actually kind of helps me out a little bit more from a stylistic perspective, because sometimes I really kind of get down on myself and I'm like, your writing sucks. And it's not that reading other people's books are like, oh, but it's better than that. It's more of like, see, it's okay sometimes if you write simplistic prose, like that's okay, that's not bad. Yeah, so basically up until very recently, terrified of plagiarism, and I'm working on this novel and I'm like, what if this is just plagiarism? Like the comps, like let's go with the comps I mentioned, and I'll tell you kind of like how those comps apply. If you're a Save the Cat person, you might be familiar with Save the Cat's like genres. The Incredible Hulk, monster in the house, right? There's a monster. How does this monster come to be? Monster does not want to actually be monster, whatever. So that sort of idea is in the book. These violent delights, like in terms of conflict between like 2, not necessarily competing houses, but like 2 different like groups of people, right? These Violent Delights is kind of a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. This is not a Romeo and Juliet. It's not a romantic sort of, that's not the conflict at all. But there is a degree of these 2 worlds are in heavy conflict. Arcane is where I got concerned and was nervous because in my story, again, like steampunk fantasy, that's not super novel. The themes that made me super nervous were the like kind of underground world aspect. The story that I've written, there's basically top side and lower levels. Well-to-do people live up top, and not well-to-do people live at the bottom. And I was like, this is basically the same thing as Arcane. You are plagiarizing Arcane. Everyone's gonna claim out for it. Then I'm like, I need to make it different. And then there's a degree of me just like throwing things against the wall, hoping things stick. And then I'm just doing too much in the story, basically, because I'm thinking to myself, I need to make it different. So let's just do all this stuff that's different from Arcane, and so that makes it less like Arcane. That doesn't make sense, which is kind of the point. It like doesn't make sense. There's nothing new under the sun, and we are all influenced by each other. I just mentioned These Violent Delights that is inspired by Romeo and Juliet. It's like a Romeo and Juliet retelling. John J. Zhao has said that part of their inspiration for Iron Widow was this anime that I've never watched. So hopefully I'm pronouncing the anime correctly. Darling in the Franxx. Basically, John J. Zhao did not like where they went with the story, and they were like, I don't like where it went. I'm gonna make it better. They saw something and didn't like where it went, and that inspired them to create something else. Stories that are set in like magical schools. A lot of that inspiration comes from Harry Potter, and that's okay. So why is it not okay that you're inspired by the setting of Arcane and build a new story from like that inspiration of that setting? But like reminding myself that just because you are writing a story that has like inspirations from something, you're not plagiarizing it, and I'm very upfront. Like that is where that inspiration is coming from. I think if I was trying to pass it off as like I did it first, then that's kind of stupid. But see the entire Raylo community, right? Raylo fan fiction becoming novel. It's okay for art to inspire art. It's okay if your story is inspired by another story. It is okay for you to say that. It's okay for me to say that. The setting was very much inspired by Arcane. Also, Arcane is not the first one to do an Undercity trope. City of Ember, Alita Battle Angel, Mortal Engines, like it's been done. I like what Brandon Sanderson said, which is ideas are cheap. It's about execution. A lot goes into taking a concept, an idea, and stretching that out into a fully realized novel with a beginning, middle, and end, with a host of characters that you are fleshing out so much that they are like real people that are struggling through tiny, like minute things, like the general public, but also big stakes. Like creating something like that from a concept, that is where the art happens. Like that's the work. I think it was more of me being like just reminding myself that it's okay, you're doing okay. They're there. So I think I kind of got into my head again in the middle of November about this. Also, this degree of like sometimes feeling like I know too much about like how the hot dog is made when it comes to writing a book. In the past, so I'd say pre my publishing deal, I was not using Save the Cat's beat sheet to write stories. The lighting's changing a lot. I hope that you guys are okay with that. It's like really dark, isn't it? Ugh. Now you're like, it's not dark. Whose fault is that? What do I do with you? Can you be useful? I didn't want to do this because there's like a glare on my glasses, like I know there is. Okay, does that help? Oh my god. Hermione, shut up. Anyone watch Harry Potter musical? We're in it for the long haul, people. Party rock is in the house tonight. Shut up. Forget copyrighted. It was kind of dark. I think it's barely a little bit brighter. Anyway, like where did I leave off? With writing, I almost know a little bit too much about like how the hot dog is made now. Like before, when I wrote Children with Gifts, I wrote it without like any knowledge of a beat sheet, just with like the general Act 1, Act 2, Act 3's like story structure. And so I was just kind of like writing for fun with little knowledge and like having a time about like just style and structure and how that plays a role in like writing something professionally, like professional work. Now the lighting's changed. You're gonna have to deal with it. But now when I plot, like I'm a very intentional plotter. I know I can't do like chapter plotting per se or scene plotting. I go as deep as the beats as the beat. So each beat of my novel, I do have a plan. Like this is what happens in this beat. And I think now, because I like just know so much about plotting and structure and style, and are you using too many gerunds, and are you using too many dialogue tags as well as the action tag? Like, there's just so much I'm thinking about sometimes when I'm drafting that I have to like catch myself and be like, we'll edit in post. We'll edit in post. So like in the middle of this writing month, I just like was so like I had 3 versions of chapter 1. I'd kind of written 2 different versions of the inciting incident. So I was having a hard time figuring out how to get to act 2. It just seemed like I was struggling so much with this story that part of me was like, is this story like meant to be written right now at least? Or like I got super close to just like giving up with the story entirely, and maybe not abandoning it per se, but at least like definitely shelving it, because I was like, I know what I want to do. I am not getting there. I feel like I'm just like hitting my head against the brick wall trying to make this story work. I'm trying to make fetch happen, and it's not going to happen. I shelve it. In the end, I shelved it for like a grand total of like 6 hours. But I was like, you know what? Maybe this just isn't the story right now. This isn't meant to be right now. This is not the one. Maybe if I come back with fresh eyes. But I was even like hesitant to do that because this was me coming in with fresh eyes. I wrote the story a year ago. Just like put it down. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And I was almost nervous for future me to look at this again, because I have 4 openings, 2 catalysts, or 2 inciting incidents, like so many versions of like the same chapter. Like future me going into this is gonna have a panic attack. Like, like what is this? I have to have at least written like 100 to 120,000 words, and I have nothing to show for it. So then I'm like, okay, it's fine. I will work on something else. Plot twist: I don't have something else. And this is the first time I think in my life that this has ever happened, that I don't have a solid concept idea plus like at least 1 or 2 characters in my brain that I am noodling. In general, when I'm not paying attention or I'm daydreaming, I'm thinking about my stories. When my brain is unsupervised, I come up with ideas. I've never really been in the position of not having a story idea. But kind of looking back at the last at least like 2.5 years, this year specifically, there has been a lot of revising happening. Mostly all I did this year, in the year 2024, is revise. And I have like not put on my like drafting cap until very recently, like this October, November. This is me putting on like my drafting cap really. And because I've been like working on projects like with I'd say deadlines, but like these are deadlines decided upon by like me and my agent, like rights, that sort of thing. But now I have like deadlines. It's not to say like this isn't just for fun. Like this is still very fun for me, but this isn't only for fun anymore. I have an agent, and you know, there's a degree I think in my brain, like a kind of a worry that like if I don't produce enough, will my agent drop me? And I have no reason to believe that. I think my agent's fantastic. They have not acted in a way in the past that suggests that would happen. With this story that I'm writing, she straight up told me, there is no deadline for this story. You will, when you have like more polished draft that you're happy with, send it over to me. I have an agent. This is a job. So to a degree, people are depending on you. You need to produce work. You need to keep writing. And I'm in this spot where I'm realizing that I have not had a new, fresh idea or concept in my head all year. I've never experienced this before. And I'm like, oh no. I have 3 like 1-line ideas, like I keep pinned on a board. None of them I think I'm really in a position to write. One of them is that is just gonna be very like emotional sort of thing, and I'm not gonna be doing that. Another one would definitely be more contemporary, which is just like a genre I don't necessarily write in, and I think I'm not yet in a position to branch out and write contemporary if I'm kind of marketing myself as a fantasy writer anyway. That's part of the caveat, right, with traditional publishing, is there's a little more thought about like how you are presented as a author, and that being like consistent. You know, if I'm kind of starting off my career in the fantasy space, I should stick there and like make a name for myself before kind of moving on to like contemporary or something like that. If I was kind of self-publishing, and of course it's also an option for me to just like self-publish like this one book, or like write under a pen name, that would be totally different. Anyway, yeah, one of them is like a very contemporary idea and like more contemporary, and I'm just not that's not gonna happen right now, to be quite honest. And the other one, I like the idea, I like the concept, but I just have vibes. I don't even have people in my head yet. And sometimes there's a degree of actually like bang my head against the wall a little bit for the ideas to come to me. Like I just kind of like noodle with ideas, write stuff up, type stuff up, and then things start to like flow. I don't have a real idea. I don't have a new project. Like if I shelve this project, I'm fresh out of projects. I don't know what comes after this project. So where am I now? These are all of my woes and complaints about trying to make this story work. And I think all of this, to sum it all up, writing just got really hard this month. I was just really stuck. I think one thing that I have held on to about this whole thing is, even though this has been like a rough writing experience, I did not lose like passion for this project. I didn't lose my excitement for this project, and I think excitement might be too big of a word. The excitement for me is definitely there in like the Pinterest stage of writing. That's like where I'm the most excited. It's not that I was like super like jazzed all the time, obviously, about this story during all this entire month. In the past, Children with Gifts was the first book I ever finished, and I've been writing since high school, and now like high school books, like do they count? Whatever. Writing in college, I've had a lot of book ideas. I've made it usually to like the end of Act 1, a little bit of Act 2. I don't think I've like really ever made it to Act 3 of a story before. Children with Gifts was one that I thought was gonna be an unfinished, honestly, until I just was, for whatever reason, like able to wrap it up and figure out what I needed to do to make that happen. But in the past, I just abandoned books. For the first time these last couple of years, I'm finishing them. And there's a degree of discipline with writing there. I think you can't always rely on like the passion and the excitement of a new idea, new like, shiny, juicy idea to keep the momentum going as you write the entire book. Throughout all of this, even when I was considering kind of like shelving the project, I wasn't really thinking about like abandoning it forever. And I also still wanted to tell the story. I like really do believe I can still make this work. I think I also had this realization that I may write this story and finish this book, but it might not be my best story. So let me explain. I recently finished watching Arcane Season 2. We will not talk, there will be no spoilers here. So don't worry, you're okay. I recently finished watching Arcane Season 2. I would rate Arcane Season 1 like 11 out of 10 stars. Season 1, 8, left no crumbs, no notes. Season 2, really enjoyed it. Felt like it struggled a little bit with pacing, which I think is the general consensus, which is probably more due to like time restrictions and limitations. They weren't allowed to make longer episodes. That being said, Arcane Season 2, I would still give like 8.5 out of 10 stars. Like, so fantastic show. Like Arcane Season 2 is still fantastic. But I think a lot of my disappointment was from the fact that you gave us Season 1 already. Season 1 like killed it, and the fact that Season 2, I have notes. Yeah, it's disappointing. It's a bit of a letdown. You're like, oh, so it's good as Season 1. Basically. It's like, it's not as good as Season 1. That is okay. It's still, like I said, a fantastic show. I still give it like 8.5, 9 out of 10 stars. And in general, artists are not creating like works or stories of equal quality and caliber every single time, right? People are going to like some stories more than others. At least right now. And this might not be the case when I'm done with the story, but I feel like The Sun Has a Shadow, to me, which is the second book I was working on, the Dragon Phoenix book, seems much stronger than the one I'm working on right now. And it's stupid, frankly, to be comparing them, because one of them has been edited like to filth and has had multiple eyes on it, and has really been tightened and cleaned up. And one of them, I am redrafting a first draft. Like, Dami, what are you even doing? Like, there's one thing to compare your story to, someone else's story, because remember, you're comparing your story to like a final draft of someone else's story. Is one thing to compare it to a final draft of your own story. Like, at least right now, that is how I feel. I just feel like The Sun Has a Shadow, and I have this inkling or feeling that, like, what if The Sun Has a Shadow is a stronger story even when I'm done? That might not be the case. It's like also okay. Like, it's okay if I like one book more than another book that I've written. It's okay if other people like one book more than another book that I've written. That isn't a reason to shelve a book. And I think that was one of the biggest things that drew me out of the hopelessness spiral with this project. You can still complete it. You might not love it at the end of draft 1. That isn't to say you might not be, like, I can fix it to the point where I do love it. It's okay if I love another one of my stories more. I'm not saying to produce less than stellar work. I'm not saying to produce like slop, right? I'm saying some of my books just will be better than some of my other books. Like, that's just how it is. That is okay. And I think, like, being perceived in that sense, like, if people read Sun as a Shadow and also love it and then read this book and they're disappointed, you're a failure. And that's not true. Like, this is so subjective. And some people might actually like this book more than Sun as a Shadow. Other people liked Arcane Season 2 way more than I did. Some people liked it better than Season 1. And all of that is totally valid. There's no way we can all put out masterpieces every single time. That's not to say the Sun as a Shadow was a masterpiece. But it's almost like the Sun as a Shadow I'm super proud of. Just because one story seemed to kind of flow out of me a little bit easier than another, that doesn't make the story that's kind of coming a little bit harder or just a little bit more difficult, that doesn't make it worse. It just makes it harder for me personally to write. In conclusion, what is like the purpose of the story? This entire ramble. This has been my experience of like when writing gets hard. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. This is gonna, jeez, I don't even know. It's okay. This is like a rambling one. I think I've kind of I do a good job marketing myself as like a rambling writer or a rambling sort of creator. Right now with this work in progress, I think I recently hit like 17K, like 17,000 words. I am truly writing it like it's draft 1. I do have like the old manuscript and chapters and stuff kind of on the side. And if I'm thinking about like a scene I've already written, I might look at my old work as like a refresher. These are all new words in a different order now. I think it's helpful to draft it like this because this story has given me such a hard time that like it's just associated with baggage. Like this story just comes with so much baggage now. Not like even emotional baggage in terms of like the themes of the story, like the story I'm trying to tell, but just in terms of the process of writing this story. Like it's just coming with a lot of baggage. The other thing is people like authors like take a while to write books. I like kind of forget this. I think V.E. Schwab was working on The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue for like 10 years. What does it look like for you? I actually do want to know this. What does it look like for you when writing gets hard? What has that experience look like? What does it feel like? Are you able to like get back into the project when writing gets hard? Like just historically, what has that been like for you? Yeah, I know. I think I can make the story work. I really do believe in the story. I think it's a testament to how far I've come as a writer that I can shelve something and come back to it, or I can like finish a whole book, or I can identify like what's not working. But right now writing is a bit hard. Starting from zero, it's been feeling a little bit easier, and I hope it does get easier, even if it takes a while. Because I believe in the story, and I do believe I can get there, and I think that's what it is. I do believe I can get there. But anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this very rambly, ranty video. I hope this video, thank you wow, it's been a while. I've already forgotten my outro. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was mildly interesting or at least entertaining. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next one.
I wish we could skip right to the end.